Hello, everyone. This is the Local 100 Fightback Coalition Facebook and YouTube live stream about the Zohran Mamdani campaign and the movement that's grown up around this campaign. I'm John Ferretti. Joining me tonight is Seth Rosenberg and Anthony Steiniger. As you know, our coalition has done, there's something in the background, some kind of noises in the background.
I hear it too, but it's not me.
Oh, okay. Got it?
Fine.
Okay.
Yep.
So as you know, our coalition is a long-time activists within Local 100. We're both progressives and socialists, kind of in a united front to fight for union democracy. And there's a reason why Zohran's campaign would connect with people involved in these struggles, involved in working class struggles, immigrant rights struggles, anti-sexist struggles, struggles to fight for the future of American democracy. So it's not that surprising that our campaign would want to get involved in a movement like this. But I want to try to give a flavor of what this movement has looked like. There's a short video I want to show of Zohran speaking at his Manhattan rally shortly before his victory on June 24th. It's just to give a flavor of what ideas he's proposing in terms of working class struggle, what kind of ways he's messaging those proposals and those reforms that he's fighting for. And also as a way you can get a sense of how the crowd reacts to the message that he puts out. So I'm just going to share my screen and we'll play about a 4 or 5 minute video. While we're watching the video, I'm going to be sharing out to various Facebook and other social media groups to try to build the widest audience and get others to join us. So let me just share the screen. Here we go. Okay, share screen. Okay, so we're going to start here.
We stand on the verge of a victory that will resonate across the country and the world. Make no mistake, this victory will be historic, not just because of who I am, a Muslim immigrant and a proud Democratic Socialist. But for what we will do, make this city affordable for everyone. I think of a woman I met on the BX33 in the Bronx a few years ago. As I sat next to her, she told me, I used to love New York, but now it's just where I live. We're going to make this city one where working people can love it once again. That is who I am thinking about tonight, the New Yorkers who make this city run. Because after this rally, as many of us sleep, millions of our neighbors will step out onto moonlit streets across our city. Nurses working the night shift will put on their scrubs and save lives. City workers will clean subway stations and pick up our trash. Office buildings will be made new again as the midnight shift scrubs and polishes in the dark. Many of these New Yorkers are immigrants who traveled to this city from faraway countries with nothing in their pockets except a dream of a better life. And even more New Yorkers will spend the entire night tirelessly working and return home carrying the burden that it still isn't enough. The sun rises, the bills continue to climb, and the stress never seems to fade. If New York truly is the city that never sleeps, we deserve a mayor who fights for those of us who labor at every single hour of the day. I will be that mayor. And I want to tell you that when we launched, Thank you, my friends. When we launched this campaign on a cold October evening, few thought we could win. Only a couple more could even pronounce my name. Andrew Cuomo still can't. The so-called experts said we would be lucky to break 5%. But I always knew that we would build a campaign just like this. So when a disgraced former governor questions whether or not we can lead this city, I look at our campaign and I know the answer. Over 1 million doors knocked, more than 40,000 volunteers. A movement that the pundits and politicians had written off, now on the precipice of toppling a political dynasty. And because of that, we will win a city that we can afford. But what does winning look like? It looks like a rent-stabilized retiree who wakes up on the first of every month knowing the amount they're going to pay hasn't soared since the month before. Together, New York, we're going to freeze the... It looks like a single mom who can drop her kids off at school and know she won't be late to work because her bus will arrive on time and cost nothing at all. Together, New York, we're going to make buses fast and free. It looks like a young family that doesn't have to move to the suburbs because childcare doesn't cost more than college. In fact, it's free. Together, New York, we're going to deliver universal. And it looks like safety for everyone. Whether you're on the street, riding the subway, or a house of worship, with our Department of Community Safety, we will invest in the mental health services that we know work, and we'll tackle the rise in hate crimes that fill too many Jewish and Muslim New Yorkers with fear.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. Stop sharing. Okay. Let me just get the screen back the way we had it. Okay. Yeah, Celso Garcia said he was there. It was a great speech. I was there too. Yuri K commented that, did you see Samuelson speak at the Zohran rally? He said, still no endorsement, though. I wouldn't be surprised if they endorse Cuomo again. Well, actually, Yuri, it's even shadier than that. They don't want to get involved because they think that Eric Adams has been good for us. He's protected us. He's been real good for transit workers. That's what Samuelson said. And Samuelson is a lying snake traitor, and I wouldn't expect anything less from him. In fact, he went there and gave a speech where he made it seem like he was endorsing Zohran, and then when he was asked about it, he said, no, it's not an endorsement because we were just endorsing his ideas for transit, but we're not endorsing him in particular. So they're going to take no position at all in the middle of one of the most important elections in the history of the city. when our members have needs that need to be amplified, and this is a campaign that's amplifying it. So go try to make sense out of that. Seth, I know that you wanted to kind of lead off with some comments about the campaign and the movement. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for showing that clip. It's really, powerful stuff. And it's a shame that seeing a candidate actually speak about the working class and our needs, and that society is failing us, even though we work and keep this whole society running. It's just shocking to see actually someone talking that explicitly when you have candidates like Mayor Adams and Governor Cuomo, who are supported by the billionaires, who they'll talk in abstract about policy or whatever the thing, but their fact is that we know from their time in office that they're representatives of the ruling class, of the capitalists, of the billionaires against us. That's why you see in the news day after day now that the billionaires are spending time. Who should we support? Against Zohran. So we can talk about the limitations, but nonetheless, it's so vital. The fact that someone is actually standing up and talking about this is just stunning. So I just want to say a little bit that in this age, right, we have to be honest about the period we're in, right? Trump and MAGA have won the federal government, and they're leading brutal attacks against working people. MAGA has pretended to be this fake populist where they talk about, working people. And I think they've won over, significant amounts of rural poor people and some, white working class. However, the fact is that when you look at the legislation, it's going to gut the social programs that tons of working people rely on, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps. They're attacking, they're going into factories and pulling out workers who are not documented. So during this period where the working class and oppressed people are under attack, to see someone, right, to see a Muslim Democratic Socialist stand up for the working class and actually win win the primary is historic. They spent tens of millions of dollars. Anyone who was in front of a TV, knows it was just ad after ad lying about Zohran, slandering him with anti-Semitic stuff, raising fear that if he were to win, the city would be in chaos. All that the most horrible racist stuff of American political campaigns, and yet he won anyway. And the reason he won is because his message resonated, just like Trump's message resonated with people, because people know the system is failing them, and Trump's answers are all lies. Mamdani's resonated with New Yorkers because he's addressing the same thing. He's addressing the fact that things are getting harder and harder for working people, while the rich get richer. And that's so. And we know that the solutions he talks about, right, or at least the things he proposes, can help us, right? Freezing the rent, free childcare, free bus routes. These are, it doesn't take a genius to see that those things, right, can affect our budget and our pocketbook day after day. And that's why the billionaires are so scared, because if people start to see that there are solutions that, right, make the rich pay, which they aren't paying, right? They're just laughing their way to, trillions and trillions of dollars. Then that people are going to start to stand up and fight for that. That is the thing that the billionaires are afraid of, because they know the history. They do know that when workers stand up and they fight back, and that people march in the streets and people shut down, right? That things that built the labor movement, strikes, sit-down strikes, general strikes, shutting down cities. Those are the things that won basic things like the weekend, like the 8-hour workday, like overtime pay, like workplace safety, like workers' comp. All those things at one time were considered radical, and union organizers and socialists were killed for talking about those things, right? But we won those things, And so the idea that, Zohran's proposing very modest things now, but those things can start to light a fire. And if the power rests in the hands of working people, and the Fight Back has talked about that ever since we've been formed, and that sparking that fight back is the type of thing that we need to actually so push back against the billionaires, push back against the Trump and MAGA's brutal attacks on working people, and actually start to win. And so over the course of this time, I hope we'll talk about the details of that, like, and what workers can do, and also, somewhat some of the limitations, focusing on any one candidate, or versus the idea of that, that Zohran can spark a working class movement that can actually push those things, even necessarily if he won't always. Or another piece of it being that a big thing to talk about tonight is the issue that if he does win as a mayor of one city, when Trump controls the federal government and the billionaires control the assets in the city, right, he's going to be under brutal attack. They're going to try and make sure that he fails. And so what does the movement of working people have to do to try and win the things that we need and connect that up to his candidacy and his potential mayoral position?
I'm going to get to you, Anthony. I just wanted to get a comment in here. So also Garcia also says, talk about Andrew Cuomo. He never gave us hazard pay. He forced us to work sick during COVID, and we lost hundreds of transit workers. We got 0% raises in reality, and healthcare gutted. He's talking about retiree healthcare, but also, our workers' comp, people on IOD gutted, outsourced to private corporations. And if you're a transit worker watching us tonight who's on IOD or workers' comp, you know what the consequences for that are. You don't get your paycheck. Your family's pushed into poverty, waiting for some private corporation to get their shit together to actually be able to keep us in our homes. So this is what's going on right now. So when transit workers say politics is not about us, that's a separate issue, we want to try to push back on that and say, no, if you don't do something about politics and you don't engage in politics on a class conscious level, politics will come for you. Look at Tier 6. Look at the crisis that we face and the attacks that we faced. It's not something we can be on the sidelines about. So Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Anthony Steininger with the Local 100 Fightback Coalition. And I just want to touch on, a little bit about what Seth mentioned about Trump's message and how it resonates with working class people. And his message is one of grievance. And it is a legitimate grievance because the standard of living in this country has gone down. You can no longer, survive with just one income. You need two incomes. Healthcare is non-existent for many people, or it's completely unaffordable. Even if you have so-called Cadillac a healthcare plan through your job, which is really the only way you can have a good healthcare plan is if your job offers it. You have high deductibles. You have limits on what they'll pay for. Education is unaffordable. Many people are saddled with student debt. Many people can't afford to send their kids to college or haven't gone to college themselves because of the exorbitant cost. All of these things, where they talk about affordability, now we're dealing with runaway inflation. Gas is over $3 a gallon. It's been up to $4 a gallon in some places, $5 a gallon during the pandemic. Groceries are still very high. They're going up as we speak. All of these things, when you talk about affordability, and yet there was a time in this country when we had, when affordability wasn't really much of a concern to the majority of people, when we had the things that the Trump message talks about, when America was, in their estimation, great, at least economically, not socially, but economically, we were much better off, and we were leaders in most economic areas in the country. And at that time, you had a tax rate which was much higher than it was now. It was between 70 and 90%. And the things that Zohran Mamdani is talking about to make New York at least affordable, but I'm going to extend it out to the country, the rest of the country. You know, the things that he's talking about, you know, education, transportation, childcare, healthcare, those things were funded through taxes on the higher earners. But what we have is a party, a MAGA party, that talks this grievance, but then does the exact opposite. Their tax policy is to give cuts to the wealthiest and place the burden on the most vulnerable and the people who could least afford it, the working class. And, you know, when I get into the discussions with some of our coworkers, you know, on politics, it's usually, you know, the dynamic is usually about, well, you know, you're telling me not to vote for Trump, but the Democrats haven't done shit, you know, for want of a better word, they haven't done shit either. And, you know, I can't argue with that. But if you look now, it's playing out right now with the with Zohran Mamdani's win, because you see our governor, who isn't a friend of transit workers, saying that she'll block, you know, parts of Mamdani's agenda. She'll make sure that there won't be free buses. You know, she'll block that. She'll block his tax agenda to the extent that she can block it. And you have people like, you know, Hakeem Jeffries, who can't come out and say whether or not he supports Zohran Mamdani, which in any other time, he would automatically say something like vote blue no matter who. Mm-hmm. You know, and you have the two who were prominent Democrats, even though now, you know, Cuomo resigned in disgrace as governor, you know, and he's not a friend of transit workers either, who wants to come back into the race, who actually has re-entered the race as an independent, which is something that you don't really hear of in New York City politics. Usually everyone gets right behind the Democratic nominee. Then you have Adams, who didn't even participate in the process, who wants to still claim or associate or affiliate himself with working class New Yorkers and say that, hey, I'm the guy for you. And yet he's riddled with corruption scandals and recently had a lawsuit filed against him by a police official, you know, saying that alleging that the police department is run as a criminal enterprise. So these are your choices. And do you sit there with your grievance, your legitimate grievance, and do you believe someone who, you know, the MAGA party, the Republican Party, and by extension, these independent candidates who are saying that, you know, Cuomo and Adams, who by extension might as well be MAGA.
They take money from MAGA billionaire.
Exactly. I was going to
thank you for
reminding me. Exactly. Yeah. This is who are funding, the people who are funding their independent campaigns, who they're looking to court, are people, the same people who, through their think tanks like the Manhattan Institute, write policy papers that they send out to every single representative you have in the state legislature and assembly, and the governors and the mayors. They send these policy papers out, recommending that we get pittance for a raise. They recommend that we they cut our health care. They recommend, you know, things like putting one person on the train, or things like transit worker 1, transit worker 2, all of these things that would put us in danger and lower our salaries and our benefits. You're going to vote for these people, or you're going to vote for somebody who has solutions, who's put forth solutions. You know, to me, it's a no-brainer. To me, it doesn't require much hand-wringing or much debate to know who I'm going to vote for, or who I'm going to support in this election.
Yeah. just to go back to some of the comments, somebody, Yuri had asked, do you guys know the details of Cuomo stealing money from the MTA? Zoran made that reference during the debate. Yeah, he outright stole the MTA lockbox money that was supposed to be there as a rainy day fund for the MTA, and he outright stole it and gave it to ski resorts upstate that had a bad year. So basically, he rewarded the billionaires that own the ski resorts at the expense of providing basic essential funding for the transit system in case there was a crisis, which, as we know, as transit workers, they're always crying like they're Chicken Little and they have a crisis, and nobody seems to know why they have a crisis. It's $54 billion in bond debt to Wall Street parasites getting paid a guaranteed return of investment of 4% per year on the money they're lending us. That's triple tax exempt. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, another thing when you mentioned, this, what you just said reminded me of another reason why we should vote for Mamdani. We have a governor who gave over $750 million to the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
To the Buffalo Bills. A billionaire owns the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
For a stadium because he threatened to move out of New York State. I don't even know if he threatened to move out, but whatever, you're giving $750 million to a sports team that only plays 8 games.
Mm-hmm.
8 games in that stadium. The stadium really will sit empty for the rest of the year. But
Yeah.
you can give $750 million to this, yet you can impose a regressive tax through congestion pricing, which is going to be paid mostly by the working class. Now, if you had spent $750 million on improving transit so that people in the outer boroughs and the surrounding metro area could have a reliable transit system, then you put in congestion pricing, that would make sense. But as it is now, there really isn't a reliable alternative for people for transit, because you put the cart before the horse. You're saying that you're going to use congestion pricing to improve transit, but we've been through this before. We have all these tolls on the bridges that keep going up and up and up, and yet nothing improves.
Yeah.
It's the same song and dance. Tax the wealthy. It's something that was done years ago, which worked, where we had infrastructure, where we had services. But the MAGA Democrats, that's what I'm gonna start calling them, the MAGA Democrats, because that's what they are, don't want to do that. So why would you not vote for somebody who has solutions?
Yeah. Well, I mean, also the thing is that when is the last time you had a mayor that speaks centering working class voices, who amplifies the voices of those who work the night shift, those who receive the least respect in our society, because of the ruling class contempt that we get from all quarters, from the Democratic Party establishment, from MAGA, from the news media, everywhere. People look at workers as kind of an afterthought, kind of like, well, you're supposed to do that. You want a ticker tape parade for doing your job, and yet they idolize the billionaires. And Kathy Hochul, by the way, everything is corruption with her. Her husband ran the concessions for the Buffalo Bills, so that's nothing but a direct kickback to her own family. So she is Cuomo with all of Cuomo's corruption without Cuomo. That's what Kathy Hochul is. So I just want to try to transition into some of the stakes that we are facing, because we have to look at the national scene as Seth was talking about, the danger that we face on a national level with an outright white supremacist fascist government in control of every institution that provides services for poor and working class people. And you see massive cuts to Medicaid, massive cuts to SNAP, any kind of service, veteran services, any kind of service that benefits poor and working class people has been gutted in their big, beautiful disaster bill. And Trump, after running on the pretense that he cares about making America great again, making Americans great again, making working class people able to afford to live and create an economy that where they're actually able to survive. All that posturing, what ended up happening in Washington was nothing but corporate welfare gone berserk. These tax cuts, where's that money going to go? It's going to go directly to buying their own stock, inflating the value of their worthless stocks and their companies that don't actually have this valuation that we think they have. And that's a ticking time bomb that's going to blow up and destroy the economy. Then you have tariffs, which Trump is engaged in all over the world, with threatening other countries with tariffs that only drive up the prices of all the goods and services that we all need. So we have that. Then we have the ICE roundups, which are again an attack on the working class, because it's the working class that does the jobs that nobody else wants to do at the lowest wages, in the worst conditions. And then you have ICE. And ICE has basically become Trump's Gestapo. And it's being funded to the hilt. It is now the third largest military organization of any kind in the world. It has a bigger budget than the Israeli military. These are very scary times. These are very dangerous times. There is no guarantee that there will ever be a fair and democratic American election ever again. And that is the landscape in which Zohran Mamdani potentially comes to power. And we have to be honest about the fact that there are forces within MAGA who will try to kill him, who will, and Trump has already said that he is, it's open to the idea of deporting him and denaturalizing him and sending him to some gulag somewhere. So it couldn't be any clearer, more starkly posed, the danger that we all face. So Seth, if you can you talk a little bit about that and how the Mamdani movement and how the working class needs to take seriously building institutions and collective self-defense, and the stakes that we can't just keep doing what we're doing, as the DSA leadership says cluelessly. That's just more and more electoralism, more and more door knocking, more and more rallies. That is not an effective answer to fascism, and it never has been. Yes, we need more numbers in the street, but we need a movement that actually starts delivering blows to Trump and MAGA. Seth, got it.
Yeah, let me get to that in a second. Let me just
sure.
Connect a few dots first, which is that, for people who are on the fence, right, transit workers who we're talking to who are on the fence about this, who are against Mamdani, you have to, Mamdani is the only one talking explicitly about how important the working class is. And yes, there can be lip service about that, but the fact is that we have to stop the trend that's been going that, I spoke about and Anthony spoke about some, which is that working people are working harder and harder for less. And every transit worker here knows that each contract, things get worse for us, right? Whether it's a 5-year wage progression or wages that don't keep up with inflation, or our union giving away retiree healthcare, Medicare Advantage, forcing us into Medicare Advantage so we can't have traditional Medicare. All these things, right? We know that it's piling up, and it's not just us; it's unions around the country that this is facing. It's all, and workers without unions are facing it even more. And we know that Cuomo and Adams both are enemies who've taken part in those attacks. Cuomo was the author of Tier 6, right? And he's the one who led that attack, one of the biggest attacks on the New York working class in years. And then Adams played a major role in the attacks on not ours, but New York City retiree healthcare. And so the idea that you have unions out there, or Local 100, or workers groups who are fighting for healthcare, saying that one of those candidates, Adams or Cuomo, might be a solution, and not supporting the candidate who openly talks about how important it is for the city to be affordable, is just crazy. But that's the world we're living in now. And so what are we going to do to stop that, right? If you want to stop the attacks on us, if you want us to get wage increases that matter, to keep our healthcare benefits and make them better, right? Then we have to do what won those things in the first place. Like I talked about, there was a time where we didn't have the weekend or an 8-hour workday or workplace safety or workers' compensation or workplace health or healthcare, right? All those things were fought for by unions and by workers. They took over factories, they took over cities, they shut stuff down. We don't learn that history anymore, right? Mostly led by socialists, sometimes by anarchists, communists, right? And fought and won those things. And to do that, we have to start those struggles again, right? And I'm not saying that the Mamdani campaign is the answer. I don't think any candidate or any electoral position is the answer. But the amount that it's done to get those things, this campaign has done to get those things in people's mind again and get people thinking again and get people with hope that we can actually fight and win things has been immense, right? And given the nature of things and given the attacks that are coming, to actually have a center where we can actually start sparking the workers' movement again is huge.
Seth, can you respond to Thomas Copperplate? He's had two comments that I think we should address because I take his differences seriously, and we need to really discuss, what those differences are. So let
me get to your point first, and then I'll circle back to talk about.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay,
but I just wanted to let Thomas know that we were gonna.
Yeah, no, I see that. I see the issues there.
I got it.
So we have to be realistic and recognize that if Mamdani wins, that it's a victory, but a limited victory. In the fact that that how much power we have to actually do anything, and we've also seen people who have run on the left who have ended up capitulating, right? People like AOC who have become part of the power system. There's some things she does that are supportable, but she's also become part of the Democratic power structure. And then also the fact that, and I think this is the most pressing issue, is that if he wins, we already saw just in the primary the vicious attack on him and on the left by MAGA, by Trump, and the idea that that he will win. And when you've seen victories like this, both in the U.S. and around the world before, where you see someone win in a limited position who's a leftist or who's a progressive or anything like that, you see that all the forces of reaction of the right wing, of the billionaires, all come together to say, we're going to make sure you fail.
Yep.
And that's what Trump and MAGA and the New York billionaires and real estate and even significant parts of the Democratic Party are going to do to make sure, because the idea that you could actually have a movement of working and oppressed people who win, have put someone into a mayor position and he actually delivers for them is the type of thing that could create a whirlwind around the country. And so they are going to do everything they can do to stop him. And, like John said, this stuff about, denaturalizing an American citizen and sending him, to a gulag overseas, right? Those type of things both can lead to MAGA violence. And we've seen a lot of MAGA violence over the years, and can lead to, but also, legislatively in Albany and all these things, you can see that they're going to end up, the rich and the powerful are going to do everything they can to make sure that the working class doesn't win a thing, and people go like, oh yeah, we don't have any hope. And so connecting that up to what I was saying before is that what's key is that we always have to remember, and Fight Back always tries to remember, that the power lies with working class fight back, right? Working class movements, working class struggles. That's what won us all the victories that we have. That's what built our unions. That's what gave us the weekend. That's what gave us the 8-hour workday, all of those things. And so we don't see Mamdani's campaign as a solution. We don't see it but we do see that a victory by him would actually help improve morale and provide a boost to the working class movement and open up possibilities. And so if we want to defend Mamdani, if he becomes mayor, from all these attacks, right, which we do, the way to do that is through building this movement, right? If you look at Trump, right, people talk about how he's Teflon and how all these things like roll off him. And the reason is because he has a movement behind him, the MAGA movement behind him, right? And what we need is something similar to that on the left, not with the similar politics, but with a similar motivation to win our goals. Now, their goals are, right, MAGA's goals are racist. They're attacking immigrants. They are anti-Semitic. They are, and we've seen actually anti-worker. But if we have those, right, in reverse, if we have ones that are actually pro-immigrant, that are actually pro-worker, that are actually, anti-racist, that type of movement, those type of things have won in the past. If you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at the worker struggles of the 1930s, have been incredibly powerful. And, right, that we need to not just focus on winning an election, but actually building struggles in the workplace that can actually, talk about the same things that he's talking about winning affordability, talking about winning better wages, better working conditions, better benefits, and doing so, mobilizing people when those attacks come, right? If Trump's attacks come and there are workers are out in the streets standing up saying we won't accept these attacks, that we're going to defend. We want free childcare. We want free buses. We want a rent freeze. Those kind of things are going to be shown around the country, and it's not going to be as easy for them to accomplish sabotaging the ideas that are out there, from Mamdani about actually winning gains for working people. So the central key there is working class movements. Whenever workers have stood up by the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, and millions, right, and stood strong and proud, that there's been a much better chance of actually holding on to what we have and winning. And I think it's undeniable that the Mamdani campaign has started to spark the idea that we can win things and that we can hold on to what we have. So getting back to Thomas's point, it's we'll fight back is
hold on. I'm just going to put up the comments on the screen.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Thomas says the problem of course transit workers in the working class at large is that Zohran is running to refurbish a capitalist party, the Democrats, whose whole purpose is to maintain the status quo. And then he says we need a fighting workers party opposed to both Democrats and Republicans. We need that to stop Trump reaction, which has paved the way for the Democrats. So, Seth, you were going to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there I agree with. I certainly think, the Democrats are a capitalist party. They paved the way for MAGA by retreating, which is what they always do. And, it remains to be seen what Zohran, what he will do. There's been a history of Democratic Socialists who've gotten into office and they capitulated. So I think that it's, I think there are valid points in there. The thing is that if you look at the reality of, I agree. I think, I'm a socialist. I believe that I'm a revolutionary socialist. I believe that workers should run our society and we should overthrow capitalism. And I think that's an important thing. And we need in the end, we need a revolutionary party to do that. Not just a workers' party. However, right, as a Marxist, I also believe in looking at the reality on the ground right now. Fascism is winning, right? There are not mass worker struggles going on right now, right? There are not general strikes. The labor bureaucracy has a very strong grip on the unionized working class. So how do we get from where we are now to actually building, right, mass struggles, and it's going to come through mass struggles. How are we going to build a working class party? There's very little working class consciousness. There's a lot of anger, right? And so Local 100 Fight Back has taken the position, right? We supported Harris in the last election. And I think that was the correct position, because I think it's pretty clear now that the conditions for unions and workers to struggle and fight for immigrants' rights, to fight against the genocide in Israel, in Gaza, to fight against attacks on working people would be much better. We would be in a much better tactical position to fight, right, if Trump and MAGA were not in the ascendancy right now. And so we believe that, and Zohran he's not a centrist Democrat. He's a Democratic
He's not
Socialist.
a Democrat at all. He never mentions he's a Democrat.
Well,
he's a Democrat.
He's running on the Democratic ticket,
He's
right?
running in the Democratic Party
Yep.
because that is the easiest way to win power, given the rigged electoral system that we have. And let's be honest, that either a Democrat or a Republican is going to win in most elections. And for the working class to be on the sidelines and not part of actually attempting to hijack and to rip away a party that's base is working class, poor, interracial immigrant would be insane in the face of fascism. It would be insane not to use whatever power we have as voters, as taxpayers, as workers, to be part of a movement to stop fascism in whatever way we can. Now, that can mean going down to 26 Federal Plaza and putting your body on the line to stop immigrants from being disappeared to gulags all around the world. It can mean mass protests. There are many different tactics that we need to engage in to defend ourselves. But to not use your vote to collectively block the minority in society that MAGA represents is crazy. On so
but
many
it's, John, it's more than that as well. Like, not only, like, I think that's our argument with respect to Harris, but the Mamdani campaign is explicitly putting working class demands forward,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's even more than that, which is that, right, given a time where the right is in ascendancy and is attacking, that the ability for, and we've already seen, like you saw just in the video you saw and the statistics on Mamdani's campaign, is that there is a movement building based around the ideas that he's raising, right? And so for us, it's not about him himself or winning the electoral position itself, but that showing that you can hold off the billionaires and that you can actually defy them, and that talking about this working class platform is the type of thing that can actually start to spark a working class fight back again, right? Which we haven't seen that much. And so given how perilous, and John, I talk about how perilous the conditions are right now, the idea of making a tactical decision to support this campaign, to talk to the people involved, to get involved, and to talk about that what's needed is to rebuild worker struggles, right? And that's the type of thing that can lead to recognizing that both parties, that both parties are capitalist parties, and that workers do need their own party. And the last point being that, John has been involved in the Mamdani campaign, and I'm proud that he has been.
So is Jonathan Beatrice, by the way. Jonathan Beatrice and Anthony.
Anthony wants to get in. Let me say my last point, and then I'll get him. I know he's been speaking for a while. I'm sorry about that. The last point being that John can talk about how there is a difference between, the ranks who are supporting Mamdani and like the leaders in the DSA. The leaders in the DSA, I don't think have played a very good role in this whatsoever. They're really tied to electoralism. They don't see the need for organized self-defense, and that the movement is it has primacy. But the ranks who are involved are energized, and they're asking these questions about how do we fight back against Trump, right? How do we organize on the ground to make sure that the things that Mamdani is talking about actually get accomplished, right? And the DSA leadership doesn't want to talk about those things, but that provides an opportunity for socialists and other people to get involved in those struggles on the ground, shoulder to shoulder, and actually put forth a socialist perspective on those things. And I think for those reasons, I think it's even, that type of thing where you see that can also lead to a split away from the Democratic Party. And those are the type of things, strategies you have to start talking about.
Yeah. Anthony, you got to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to be quick because honestly, I have to go. I didn't think we were going to go this long. But I want to get back to Thomas's comment about the Democratic Party, and also to add on to what Seth was talking about as far as building a movement. he's absolutely right. The Democratic Party is a capitalist party, and that's kind of what I was, alluding to and actually trying to outright say with my criticisms of Hochul, Cuomo, and Adams and the MAGA Democrats. They are a capitalist party. However, there are elements within the Democratic Party who are progressive. And also, if you could see from my shirt, it says I'm a veteran. And, I also played sports when I was younger. And something that, I think relates to everything from both of those experiences is that you have to start where you are. And even with this job, you're a conductor, you're a train operator, Seth, they couldn't just put you on that train and say, okay, make the 11:45 from Stillwell to 179. You couldn't do that. You had to be prepared. There was steps in preparation before you could be successful in making that interval and doing your job and performing it safely and professionally. There were steps you had to take. Now, the authoritarianism and fascism that we're facing right now, it didn't pop up overnight, and it didn't start with Trump. The Heritage Foundation, which wrote Project 2025, has been involved in strategically taking over our government for the past 40 or some odd years. They've been nominating judges. They've been supporting candidates. They supported legislation. You have PACs and think tanks, people like APAC, who actually write legislation and hand it to representatives for them to introduce into Congress, into the House, and into the Senate. These people, and this has been lacking on the left. So we have to start where we are, and we have a lot of catch up to do. And us as transit workers, we're in a unique position, and I'm talking about not union members and union workers as a whole and in general. Now, I'm not talking about the bureaucracy. I'm talking about if we do happen to have somebody in the bureaucracy who really wants to lead. When you talk about a labor movement or a worker union, a worker movement, you're talking about things like strikes, which is number one. And all of us, everybody listening to this, everybody who pays dues, has to start thinking about what their role would be in a real labor movement. You can't just sit at home and type on Facebook and criticize your leadership or anybody who's an oppositionist or anybody. I try to stay away from that personally. There's a lot of things we can criticize. There's a lot of things we can talk about our leadership and our bureaucracy. But when it boils down to it, they aren't our enemy. Even these guys who are sellouts, eventually they're going to get stabbed in the back too. Eventually they're going to get dumped. That's how authoritarianism works. That's how fascism works. They have no use for you anymore. At one point, so you have to get back to what being in a union is all about. You have to get back to, the socialist principles that started this labor movement. And going on strike is something, having a general strike is one of the reasons why in other countries it doesn't get this bad. Because once they go after one group of workers, all workers, in France, I forget what they were trying to do. They were trying to modify the pensions.
Yeah, the retirement age.
Yeah, and lawyers were out on the street. Even the cops, they weren't making arrests. Everybody was out there in the street and said, hell no. In this country, if you have that, you would have an all-out assault on workers. Anytime any group of workers, look at what happened with the Amazon labor union right now. You don't hear anything about them anymore. It's because in our society, in our country, they make you think that that's them. That's not me. That's them. Even if you're a union worker, even if you're, say, a nurse, or you work in a different company or in a different factory, or you work in retail, or you work in a similar industry, or you work in transportation, they want you to think that those workers, that their interests aren't your interests. But yet they are. All of our interests are linked if we work for a living. And even even if you don't work for Lehman, let's say you're a small business owner. Who's going to patronize your business if nobody has any money, if they don't have disposable income? That's what really makes this country great, is because you had a middle class. You had people who had disposable income who could go to the movies, who could go to your local pizzeria, who could go to your local coffee shop and sit down or to the movies and have a good time or whatever, or afford an automobile. It's getting to the point where you can't do that. So a lot of small businesses are collapsing. So it's our society that's collapsing because of greed at the top. And this is a trend that's been going on for 40 years. And it's been by design. And these people have strategically, when I say these people, I'm talking about the billionaires and their politicians who work for them. They've been doing this for 40 years to get to this point. Since the 1980s, they've been strategically working towards this. So yes, the Democratic Party is a capitalist party. It has been for quite some time. But, and this is a big but, a huge but, is that, you have to start where we are. And we have to work with what we have. And Mamdani right now is a seismic shift in the largest city in our country. It's a seismic shift. That's why you see that's why these people are panicking.
Yeah.
That's why they're calling him dangerous. And they're saying that having a free bus route is dangerous.
Yeah.
They're saying that the government doing something to have a grocery store, which you can look this up in places where they have tried this.
Kansas.
Yes,
Florida.
these government-run grocery stores have actually turned profits, and they're not communist. They're not communists. They're turning profits. And they're saying things like solving the problem of having food deserts by putting a government-run grocery store in neighborhoods which are food deserts, where you don't have grocery stores, which, by the way, the forces of capitalism have made it so. I don't have time to go through all of the details, but it's the forces of capitalism that have created these food deserts in poor neighborhoods. But they're saying that these are things that are dangerous.
Yeah.
And this is why. It's because they understand that they want to nip this in the bud, because they don't want a repeat of what happened back in the 30s. They don't want a repeat of what happened in the 60s, when working people actually won. When you had multiracial coalitions, where you had groups like the Panthers and the Young Patriots, who initially started out with a Confederate flag as their logo, as their emblem. In Chicago, you had a group of white people with a Confederate flag, young white people, as their emblem. But when they got with the building coalitions with the Panthers and the Young Lords, which were Hispanic Puerto Ricans, when they got together and they started building, they realized that the Confederate flag was a symbol of racism, and they dumped it. But they didn't dump the coalition. They knew that working together and recognizing that working people had the same goals and same interests and same challenges, that we could actually win this thing.
Yeah.
And they did. You had schools across the nation offer free breakfast meals. You had training programs that came out of the Great Society, things like the Job Corps, which Trump just got rid of. You had things like the Department of Education, which was created to try and help underserved people compete in an increasingly technological society through education. You had things like this that came out of those coalitions and came out of those efforts.
Yeah.
And to mention again, strikes. They work.
Mm-hmm.
They work. The only thing that these people understand is when you hit them in the pockets. The only thing they understand is boycotts and strikes. But us as transit workers and workers in general, we have to prepare for that.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, try to imagine and try to think, like, what would my role be in a work stoppage? What would my role be if there really was a general strike, even though my organization isn't going on strike, or we're not personally calling a strike? What would my role be? How can I support that? And if my organization goes on strike, how would I survive? This is what scares people really from taking action, even just on a micro level, on a day-to-day level here at Transit. It's like, yo, I can't miss my paycheck. It's what causes people to not even, say, hey, look, I'm gonna turn down overtime. Let's have it's not a violation of the Taylor law for you to refuse overtime, or to not call up the crew office and say, I don't want overtime. This place runs on overtime. It runs on overtime. They know that you're going to be desperate enough to seek overtime. They know that they can count on you. Yeah. They know that you're going to be there, and you'll beg for overtime.
Yeah,
they know that. Overtime.
Not only that, they want to dig you an early grave for you, and make sure you don't collect the pension.
Exactly.
So that's the obvious.
Exactly. Harassing people who are out on comp, harassing people who have legitimate, sick claims or taking sick days. All of these things are part of that. But you got to ask yourself as a worker, what will your role be? How are you going to prepare for that? What type of training are you going to put yourself through? And it doesn't really take that much imagination to really understand or to really get yourself prepared for that type of struggle.
Yeah. And the other question, just to follow up on that, the other question is, why the working class? Why is the working class the one they're all terrified of? Why is the working class the epithet they constantly use against us? With thugs, with gangsters, we want the world's biggest free lunch, we want a handout, we're shiftless and lazy. Why do they target us like that? Why do they fear us like that? Why do they engage in a nonstop propaganda campaign to gaslight us, to tell us we're powerless, to tell us we're lucky to have a job, to tell us that we should basically shut up and work? Like they tell LeBron James, shut up and dribble. They want to tell working class people, shut up and get back to work. They want to whip us into position. And they're snitching on themselves. They're telling on themselves about what they fear. They don't fear Zohran. They fear the working class. They feel raised expectations for working class people, who then begin to realize that they have all the power in society and that they can inflict their will upon these parasite blood-sucking bastards who make our lives hell, and that we can fight the demands. And I don't know if you looked in the crowd. Look in the crowd at these Zohran rallies. They know they did this. They know it was their will that made this happen. And for Thomas Copperthwaite, who talks about sowing illusions in the Democratic Party, the party of genocide in Palestine, which supports the Taylor law to the hilt, is dangerous. We fight Trump by mobilizing workers in independent industrial and political action.
Yeah.
Look, yes, we need to do both.
There's no illusions.
We need to do both. No, I would say, yes, we need to be honest that working class people have illusions in the Democratic Party. No shit. They've always had illusions in capitalist parties. They've always had illusions that it's not the working class that makes social change, that it's those who oppress us and exploit us, the billionaire class, who get to make those decisions. And yes, they have illusions in AOC. They have illusions in, any politician you want to name in a capitalist party. But how do you break those illusions? How do you break the backwardness of our class to get them to lead strikes? You engage in action, joint action, side by side with your coworkers, learning lessons about what works and what doesn't work, and how you use our power collectively to change the world, and how we change our expectations of what's possible through our own collective experience. Why do you think Zohran was more effective than AOC or Bernie Sanders in terms of communicating to a wide working class audience, an interracial working class audience? It's because he laser focused on their lived experience and amplified it in a way that Bernie and AOC don't. And that has everything to do with the fact that he's a socialist. It has everything to do with the fact that he stood and engage in a hunger strike to defend taxi workers that earned them $450 million in tax and debt relief. It matters. These ideas matter, and going through these experiences matter. And we can hope someday in the future that we're going to have a Labor Party, but it's not going to happen unless we go through these struggles in the world that we actually live in right now. And we cannot be on the sidelines and going through those experiences. You're actually making it impossible to have those things happen by not going through those experiences. Seth, did you want to get in to discuss some of this?
Well, just to say, we're over an hour, and I think we've been trying to, I think it's a long discussion. Just to say quickly, right, I understand where Thomas is coming from. That was certainly my position for like 2 decades, right? But I think, but I think that I don't think that it's the correct position. I think that I agree that the Democrats are the party of genocide and they support the tail law, absolutely. And you can tell the truth about the Democrats, right? And at the same time, you can say, right, revolutionaries use every tactic necessary, especially when fascism is on the rise, use every tactic necessary to try and win, right? And electoralism is certainly not the solution, but it is a piece of the struggle. And the question is, right, will the movement be stronger? Can we get closer to building a workers' party? Can we get closer to a worker-run society if we choose this tactic? And the answer, I think, is clearly yes, right? Even so, you can see my shirt, right? Free Palestine, right? Just take the struggle for Palestine right now. Regardless of what you want to say, right? The fact is that things are worse for the Palestinian cause and for Gaza under Trump, right? Then even though Biden and Harris supported the genocide, I absolutely agree with that, right? The fact is that it is worse for Palestinians under Trump, as we're going to see possibly a complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And so the idea that you don't use every tactic to try and defend the oppressed, you don't use every tactic to try and fight back, and the fact that our movements would be stronger, we would face less oppression, right? The leaders of the Palestinian movement, many of them were arrested, right? They were on visas, or they were, the leader from Colombia, right? He was actually, right, he had a green card. Is that right?
Yeah, he had a green card. He was arrested in his apartment building and sent to a gulag.
Mahmoud Khalil, right? So and if you look at our live streams, we predicted exactly these types of attacks. So is the movement to defend Palestine stronger, right, that Trump has won? Or are there more possibilities for the movement if you don't have an authoritarian who's trending towards fascism in power? And these are the type of things you have to address. And the fact is that even Lenin, for example, understood that, right? If you look at the Russian Revolution, back in the Russian period before the revolution, right? Lenin and the Bolsheviks called for votes, right, for Democratic candidates when the Black Hundreds, right, who are the reactionaries, right, the brutal, vicious reactionaries who are basically fascists, were on the ticket. And that's anyone who can say that MAGA is not, right, close to the Black Hundreds or not that type of threat, right, is fooling themselves when they're actually in charge of the greatest imperial power in the world right now. So Marxists have to be flexible on their tactics with respect to how to fight back, and to just say we're going to stand on the sidelines when this movement has the possibility of sparking, right? You can tell the truth about, right, what the limitations are. You can tell the truth about the Democrats, right, and their as a capitalist party and their viciousness, but at the same time recognize that calling for that candidate to win can be a spark and help open up space and make movement stronger, to give workers the idea that they can fight back. And over the course, we'll learn that they, and you can say, right, we said right now that workers need their own party. And I've said that workers, I believe, need a revolutionary party, right? But to use all tactics possible to build to those things, when fascism is on the rise and Palestinian rights movements are being smashed and those voices are being shut, to actually say that getting the fascists out of power would help strengthen those movements, that when workers fight back, right, they're going to be attacked by the government, going to be attacked by MAGA. Having those forces not win, and having forces who are actually talking about their for working people win, right, provide a possibility to build the type of struggles that we need, and for workers to see that they can win. And I think that's what we need.
Well, just to follow up on that, the other question is that what is going to happen in the very near future in New York is you're going to see the kinds of things you've been seeing in LA. You're going to see that billions of dollars that they passed in this big disastrous bill that makes ICE have the kind of resources to just spitball, to just do whatever the fuck they want, to just go all over the country and provoke fights and terrorize people. In the case of Zohran Mamdani, can anybody really tell me that it doesn't put us in a better position to enforce New York City sanctuary city laws and to defend immigrants and to build a collective self-defense? Having the first Muslim mayor who's a Democratic Socialist and stands for immigrant rights and stands against ICE and stands against Trump. How can you tell me that doesn't put us in a better position for workers to test their illusions in capitalism and be involved in struggles that actually point in the direction of the future that we all say we want? I don't see how abstaining from that movement, not wanting to be a part of it, and attacking a candidate who's actually willing to do those things helps us in any way, shape, or form. It actually it's sterile. It actually short circuits any potential for you to learn lessons and for them to learn lessons through their own experience. Anthony, we need to wrap up soon, but I didn't want to.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing real quick before we wrap up. What we really discuss here is ideas. And, we've gone from, since the 1980s, we've gone from the idea that, America was this country that believed in freedom and welcomed refugees, to the idea that it's okay to just grab a veteran off the street because he looks like he might be an illegal immigrant, which when they say that, they mean Hispanic, to grab him up, detain him for 3 days until he can prove that he's an American citizen. We've gone from that to this, where that seems normal. So it's like, you have to have the idea, you have to think about what your ideas are and what you think are your values are. And our country has had a shift in values and ideas. The things that Trump's doing, they're normal now. When they were unthinkable, even under Reagan, they were unthinkable. Shipping people off to some gulag, building something called Alligator Alcatraz, keeping, telling, senators and congressmen that they can't access buildings in their own district, arresting them.
Arresting a mayor.
Yeah, arresting the mayor. Arresting Congress people. These are the things that are normal now, because labeling people, un-American because they have the audacity to oppose, their government, to speak out, to exercise their First Amendment rights. These are the things that are normal now, but they took decades to normalize. We have to stop this. Every single person here has to stop this. We really are in the middle of the slide towards authoritarianism. We are really here, if we're not already completely there already. And there's going to be a lot of it's not the time where you're going to be comfortable anymore.
Yeah.
You're not going to be comfortable anymore.
Yeah.
And you have to decide, what kind of country you want to live in. Do you want to live in a free country? Do you want to live in a country where the government works for the people, or where you work for the wealthy?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want a country where your child can have an education, a reasonable expectation of being educated, and having a better life than you? Or do you want to live in a country where, as some Republicans stated, like if your father was a janitor, then you'll be a janitor. Yeah. Do you want to live in that country? It's up to you. It's up to you and what you're willing to give up for it. What role are you going to play in this struggle?
Yeah. And you know, the other thing though too is you were saying what role you'll play in these struggles. I mean, we also need to be honest about what side of the barricades we're on. Like, we have to know our history. Those who don't know the history are doomed to repeat it. I mean, we are relatively privileged workers in terms of our pay and benefits. Not that we get paid anywhere near what we should be paid. Not that the safety conditions are anywhere near what they should be. Not that our pensions or our health care are anything like what they should be, which should be the bare minimum for any person in this country. But we are relatively privileged workers who have a lot to lose. And if they've gone after Medicare and Medicaid, do you think they're not coming for your pension? Do you think you're going to be safe in retirement? These are people, the ruling class of this country have literally murdered senior citizens and thrown them in fucking nursing homes when they knew they had COVID. They've literally led to mass death amongst our own co-workers. 173 transit workers dead during COVID for no other reason than they wanted to keep the subway open 24/7 to not scare people and make everybody think everything was normal. The stakes are just too high for us to not understand that we must pick a side and that we must know what side of the barricade we have to be on, not just morally to be on the right side, but to survive, to have any real future. I live in a community that's the second largest cooperative affordable housing community in New York State. And we are hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. And we are facing 57% increases over the next 2 years because New York State is a deadbeat, no-show landlord who's done nothing to make these communities truly affordable. Everything is on the table right now. If that happens, senior citizens will be kicked out of their homes. People with disabilities will be kicked out of their homes. Even workers like myself, I'm trying to figure out how the fuck I could pay $500 more a month. So it's on right now. This is not some abstract idea. This is not some moral quest of Don Quixote. This is, are we going to have a real future? And we will have the future that we make. Just like MAGA took decades to create this hellscape, we have to get our shit together and understand what time it is. Because the illusions, like Thomas was talking about, the illusions that people have in capitalism, that's the dangerous illusions that people have in capitalism. And we need to break with that through our own struggles, through our own concrete experiences. Because it's one thing to talk about ideas. It's another thing to make those ideas real for people's lived experience. And that's what Zohran's doing. So why the hell wouldn't you support somebody like that in a position of power across the table from us when we're bargaining for better wages? It doesn't make any sense to abstain from that and to wish an any kind of different future and think that that's going to be better for us. Seth, do you want to say anything before we wrap up? You're muted. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm good. I think we're past time, so let's.
Yeah, we got to wrap up.
Yep.
Yeah. For those questions that we didn't answer, I know Yuri had some questions. I'll try to get back to you directly. And we'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This will be one of an increasing number of coalition live streams to talk about these and other issues, and also to point workers in the direction of how they can get involved and how they can play an active role in actually going through this experience with us and with our class, and learn lessons about how social change can actually be made by their own hands, by their own conscious activity, by their class conscious activity. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. We'll talk to you all real soon. Have a great night, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.